I tell a lot of stories to grown-ups. And this is one about my childhood. When I was a girl, we had baked beans every Saturday night. I didn't particularly like baked beans. I didn't dislike them, but I thought baked beans were boring. But if it was Saturday night in our house, we were going to have baked beans. Now, my mother said it was because it was convenient, but I knew the truth. You know, she said, oh, she could go shopping, she'd put the beans in the oven, they'd be ready by dinner time. But really, it was because it was tradition. We were from New Brunswick, Canada. And in New Brunswick, Canada, if it was Saturday night, everybody was going to have baked beans. Also Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, New England, most of Eastern Canada. But we had moved out west. We lived in Alberta. Didn't matter. If it was Saturday night, we were going to have beans. I dreaded the years when my birthday fell on a Saturday because it meant we were going to have cake and beans. Now, people out west, they liked my mother's beans. I didn't think they should encourage her. They would stop by on a Saturday afternoon and wait to be invited for dinner because they knew that she made a pot of beans this big and she could feed half of Edmonton. When I grew up, I thought I'd never have beans again. I mean, I remembered too much. I remembered washing the bean pot. It was my job and my sister's job to do the dishes. And if it was my job on a Saturday night to wash the dishes, I would look at that bean pot and I would say, I think it needs to soak overnight. So I'd fill it up with water and a little bit of dish soap and put the lid on, and I'd sit it on the counter. And the next evening, my sister would look at that pot because it was her turn, and she'd say, I'm not going to clean that thing. And she'd let it sit another night. And then the next Saturday, my mother would go to make beans, and she'd take the lid off, and the water inside would be funky and foul smelling, and we would be in trouble once again. And I would be in more trouble than my sister because I was older. I knew better. When I left home, I thought to myself, I will never have baked beans again unless I happen to be visiting my mother on a Saturday night. My mother came to visit. She was poking around in my kitchen. She's slamming cupboard doors. She's opening drawers. She said, Margaret, I can't find your bean pot. Where do you keep it? And I said, I don't have one. She was taken aback. She thought about it. She said, well, how do you make beans? And then I gave the answer that left her flabbergasted for years. I don't. Well, years and years passed. And, you know, I've reached the age of nostalgia. I was out in an antique shop out in Western New York, one of those dusty, cluttered places, cheap places. And there on a shelf, I saw a little bean pot, exactly like my mother's, brown and cream with a little lid on the top, but much smaller. And I thought to myself, that is just the right size for me. And I went out and bought yellow-eyed beans because those are the best kind. And fancy molasses, and salt pork, and dry mustard. and I made a pot of beans. And every once in a while, when I'm hit by a wave of nostalgia, I make a pot of beans. If you should stop by my house on a Saturday, and if I've made beans, I'll invite you for dinner.